I always believed that 40 years of love, laughter, and sacrifice could not be erased. I believed that building a home together, raising children, surviving hardships side by side meant something unshakable. But I was wrong. One secret, one betrayal, was enough to burn it all to ashes. My name is Clara. I am 70 years old, and for most of my life, I thought I had a partner I could trust with everything: my body, my soul, my dreams, my fears. My husband, Daniel, was not perfect, but he was mine. Or so I thought. We met when I was only 29, a time when I still carried the brightness of youth and the weight of dreams I had yet to fulfill. Daniel was charming, a man of words, the kind of person who could make you believe in magic with nothing more than a smile. He wasn't wealthy then, not even close. We were just two ordinary people trying to make a life together, and I thought that was enough. For 40 years, I stood beside him through everything. When he lost his first job, it was me who went out and worked extra hours at the library just so we could pay rent. When his mother fell ill, it was me who nursed her while he traveled for work. I cooked his meals, packed his lunches, made sure the children never saw the cracks in our finances. I thought this was love, carrying each other's burdens, being a safe place for one another. But the truth? Looking back now, I realize it was mostly me carrying the weight. Daniel carried his charm, his ego, and his secrets. For years, there were small moments that should have raised alarms. Late-night phone calls that he brushed off as work emergencies. Business trips that extended a day longer than expected. A sudden change in cologne that he said was a gift from a colleague. I swallowed those doubts because I believed love meant trust, and trust meant never questioning too much. I kept telling myself, he's loyal. He's just tired. He's just stressed. I repeated those excuses like prayers, because the alternative, that he might betray me, was unthinkable. After all, how could a man turn his back on 40 years of loyalty, children, grandchildren, and shared history? Then came our 40th wedding anniversary. I was excited, almost childlike in my preparations. I wanted to celebrate us, the life we had built, the struggles we had overcome. I booked a small gathering at a cozy restaurant in town, invited our closest friends and family, and even had a slideshow of old photos prepared. I wanted everyone to see what 40 years of love looked like. But as I planned, Daniel grew strangely distant. He seemed uninterested, almost annoyed by the idea of a celebration. "Clara, do we really need all this fuss?" he asked one evening, barely looking up from his phone. I laughed it off, thinking he was just being his practical, no-nonsense self. The night of the anniversary came, and I will never forget the way I felt when I saw him walk into that room. He was dressed sharply as always, but his eyes weren't on me. They scanned the crowd, restless, searching. I brushed it aside, smiled through my nerves, and welcomed our guests. We toasted, we laughed, people gave speeches about our love story. And then, as the night was ending, I noticed something odd. A woman I didn't know, sitting quietly at the back of the restaurant. Younger than me, much younger, maybe in her 40s. She wasn't talking to anyone, just staring at Daniel with a look I can only describe as intimate familiarity. My heart sank, but I told myself not to make assumptions. Maybe she was a colleague, maybe a distant relative of someone who tagged along. But when I caught Daniel glancing at her, not once, not twice, but several times, my stomach twisted into knots. After the party, when everyone left, I asked him, "Who was that woman?" He froze for a moment too long before saying casually, "Oh, just someone from work. Nothing important." His tone was dismissive, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted away from mine, like a child caught stealing. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while he snored beside me. 40 years of loyalty, 40 years of sacrifices, and for the first time, I wondered if I had been nothing more than a placeholder in his life. A convenience. Days later, my doubts turned into something far more painful. A friend from my book club, who had been at the anniversary, called me. Her voice was hesitant, almost trembling, as she said, "Clara, I don't know how to tell you this, but I recognize that woman. She's been seen with Daniel before. At cafes at the park. People in town have noticed." I felt the blood drain from my face. My friend tried to soften it, adding, "It could be innocent, of course. Maybe they're just friends." But I knew better. Deep down, I knew the truth I had been avoiding for years was finally clawing its way into the light. And then, the final blow came. I found a letter hidden in his jacket pocket, carelessly forgotten. It wasn't long, just a few sentences, written in delicate handwriting. But those words burned into my soul. Last night was unforgettable. I wish you could tell her the truth. I'm tired of being your secret. My hands shook as I read it. My vision blurred with tears, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the kitchen floor. 40 years of marriage, 40 years of devotion, erased in one cruel letter. When Daniel came home that evening, I sat at the table with the letter in front of me. My heart was pounding, my throat tight, but I asked him calmly, "Who is she?" He froze. His face drained of color, his lips parted, but no words came out. That silence told me everything I needed to know. And that was the moment when the illusion of 40 years shattered into pieces I could never put back together. The silence in our kitchen that evening was louder than any scream, heavier than any storm. I sat with the letter between us, my hands trembling as I pushed it closer to him. "Say something, Daniel," I whispered, though inside I already knew. His eyes darted to the paper, then to me, then back down again, like a guilty child caught in a lie too big to explain. Finally, he sighed, long and weary, as if my discovery was not a betrayal, but an inconvenience. "Clara, I didn't want you to find out this way." "This way?" My chest constricted. "So there is a way you wanted me to find out?" I asked, my voice breaking. 40 years of love, 40 years of sacrifice, and all he could offer was a tired sigh and an admission spoken like a man discussing the weather. "She doesn't mean anything," he said quickly, leaning forward, his hands flat on the table. It's complicated. You've always been my wife, my partner. Nothing changes that." I stared at him in disbelief. Nothing changes that? As if my heart wasn't shattering right in front of him. As if the life I thought we shared hadn't just been exposed as a lie. "Who is she?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How long?" His shoulders sagged. He ran a hand through his graying hair, avoiding my gaze. "Her name is Elise. We met at one of the corporate dinners about 6 years ago. She was lonely. I don't know, Clara. I didn't plan for it. 6 years. The room spun. 6 years of smiles, of anniversaries, of holidays spent pretending. 6 years where I sat beside him at family gatherings, holding his hand, while he whispered promises to someone else. You didn't plan for it? I repeated, my voice shaking with fury. Daniel, you don't accidentally betray your wife for 6 years. You chose this. Every time you lied, every time you came home late, every time you looked me in the eyes and said you loved me, you chose this affair. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. He had already taken so much. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I never wanted to hurt you, he muttered, almost to himself. You've been everything to me, Clara, but I felt unseen, unappreciated. Elise, she made me feel alive again. That word, alive, sliced through me like a knife. Did he not realize I had been the one keeping him alive all these years? That it was me who supported him when he had nothing, me who nursed his mother, me who raised his children while he built his career? What had Elise done that was so extraordinary? Offered him flattery, a new fragrance of excitement that 40 years of real life couldn't compete with? I stood, pushing the chair back so hard it scraped the floor. Alive! I gave you my life, Daniel. Every breath, every sacrifice, every piece of myself I gave to you. And you repaid me by sneaking around like a coward with someone half my age. He reached out as if to touch my arm, but I pulled away, disgusted by the thought of his hands that had touched her. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room while the clock ticked relentlessly, reminding me of every wasted year. I replayed our history in my mind, searching for moments that now felt poisoned. The vacations where he smiled for photos but checked his phone every few minutes. The birthdays where his gifts felt rushed, thoughtless. The times he claimed to be working late. How many of those hours were really spent with her? The next morning, I couldn't bear to look at him. He tried to talk, to explain, but every word felt like salt in an open wound. Clara, I'm sorry. I'll end it. We can work through this, he pleaded. But what he didn't understand was that something far more precious than his fidelity had been shattered. My belief. I had believed in us, in our vows, in the promise that love and loyalty would carry us through. And once that belief was gone, what was left? Days turned into weeks, and every moment was a war inside my chest. Part of me longed to hold on to the life I had built. The house, the memories, the family. I wanted to believe we could patch the cracks, pretend the earthquake hadn't shaken us to our foundation. But the other part, the part that stared at that letter over and over until the words blurred, knew that 40 years could be erased in an instant, and no amount of apologies could restore what had been lost. The betrayal bled into everything. Meals tasted bitter. Our home felt hollow, like a stage set where actors had performed a play called Marriage for 4 decades. Even our children noticed the tension. My daughter asked quietly one afternoon, "Mom, is everything okay between you and Dad?" I wanted to tell her the truth, but shame sealed my lips. How could I admit that the man she admired, the man she thought of as strong and faithful, had built his life on lies? Then came the moment I will never forget. I was cleaning out a drawer when I found not just one letter, but several, hidden in envelopes, tucked beneath receipts and old tickets, each one written in that same delicate script, each one filled with passion, longing, promises. One line burned into my memory. "I can't wait until we no longer have to hide. I dream of the day you choose me fully." I sank to the floor, clutching the papers to my chest, sobbing silently. Because in that moment, I realized Daniel hadn't just betrayed me, he had entertained the thought of replacing me, of erasing me from his life entirely, as if 40 years of love and devotion were disposable. And what hurt the most? The realization that while I had been planning anniversaries, he had been planning escapes. That night, I confronted him again. I laid the letters on the table, one by one, like evidence in a trial. His face crumpled, but instead of shame, I saw something worse, resignation. "Clara," he said softly, "I can't lie anymore. I love her. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. I thought I could live with both worlds, the stability of you, the passion of her. But I can't. I'm torn apart." I stared at him, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. "Torn apart," I whispered. "You're torn apart? Daniel, you destroyed me. You took 40 years of loyalty and ground it into dust because you wanted to feel young again. You wanted passion, excitement, and you expect me to pity you for being torn." He looked down, silent. And in that silence, I understood something I never thought I'd feel: hatred. Hatred for the man I once loved more than life itself. The marriage I thought was unshakable had already ended. The papers hadn't been filed, the vows hadn't been formally broken, but in my heart I knew. The man I had trusted with everything had betrayed me so deeply, so thoroughly, that there was no return. 40 years of love had been erased, not by time, not by death, but by his choice. And in that moment, I vowed to make a choice of my own. In the days that followed, I moved through the house like a ghost. Every corner, every photograph on the walls, mocked me with memories that no longer felt real. The smile in our wedding photo was a lie. The vacations, the holidays, the laughter at the dinner table, all of it felt tainted, contaminated by the knowledge of a secret. Daniel tried, in his own stumbling way, to patch the wound. He brought me flowers one evening, lilies, my favorite. I stared at them, their pale petals blooming beautifully, and all I could see was Elisa's handwriting on those letters. He placed them in a vase on the kitchen table, but they might as well have been weapons, each stem a reminder that beauty can mask betrayal. "Clara, we can get through this," he said again and again, as though repetition could erase reality. Counseling, forgiveness, we're too old to throw everything away. Too old. The phrase stung, as if age should chain me to misery, as if decades of loyalty meant I should accept being discarded like a faded photograph. I wasn't too old to feel pain. I wasn't too old to deserve respect. And I certainly wasn't too old to start over. But starting over terrified me. Where would I go? What would I do with the scraps of a life I thought was whole? My friends, our children, our community, all of them saw us as the couple who had made it, who had endured. How could I bear their pity when they learned the truth? One night, unable to sleep, I sat by the window and watched the moonlight stretch across the lawn. The quiet of the night pressed against my chest, and I whispered to myself, "Who am I without him?" The answer came back sharper than expected. "You are Clara, and you were someone long before Daniel." That thought gave me the smallest spark of courage. The next morning I told him, "I need time." He nodded quickly, too eagerly, as if relief flooded him that I hadn't said I'm leaving. But in my mind, time meant something different. Time to gather my strength, to decide whether to stay in the ruins or walk away before they buried me alive. I began writing in a journal, something I hadn't done since I was a young woman. At first, my words were raw, jagged, like glass on paper. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. But as the days passed, my writing shifted. I began remembering who I was before Daniel consumed my identity. Clara, who loved painting. Clara, who dreamed of traveling to Italy. Clara, who once believed she was enough, all on her own. But every spark of strength was smothered when I saw him. He carried on as though we were just weathering a storm, and soon the skies would clear. He made coffee in the mornings, hummed while he read the paper, even reached for my hand once as we walked down the street. I pulled away, and the hurt in his eyes nearly broke me until I reminded myself that he had chosen this pain. He had built this fracture, brick by brick, lie by lie. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. I answered, expecting it to be my daughter or a friend. Instead, a woman's voice, unfamiliar yet trembling, spoke my name. "Clara!" "Yes, this is Clara." There was a pause then. I shouldn't be calling, but I can't do this anymore. "I'm Elise." The air left my lungs. My knees nearly buckled, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. She didn't need to say more. I knew exactly who she was. "I love him," she blurted, her voice cracking. "But I can't keep living in the shadows. He promised me he'd leave you. He said you two were only staying together for appearances. But every time I ask, he says he needs more time. Clara, please. I just need to know the truth." The audacity stunned me. The woman who had crept into my marriage like a thief, who had stolen my husband's fidelity, was now asking me to help her. I wanted to scream, to unleash the rage that boiled in my chest. But instead, I listened. Because in her desperation, I heard the one thing Daniel had denied me: honesty. He told me the same lies. I said quietly that nothing had changed, that I was still his partner. "But Elise, if you think he'll leave me for you, you don't know him like I do. He wants comfort and passion both. He wants the security of my loyalty and the thrill of your attention. And he will keep both as long as you allow it." Her silence was heavy. Then she whispered, "So he's been lying to me too?" "Yes," I said, "because that's what he does now." She began to cry softly, and though part of me pitied her, another part felt vindicated. For 6 years, she had been the secret, the shadow. Now she was discovering the cost of loving a man who couldn't be loyal to anyone. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long time. And then, for the first time since the betrayal, I smiled. Not because of her pain, but because I realized Daniel's lies had finally caught up to him. The walls he built so carefully around his double life were starting to crumble. And when they fell, he wouldn't just lose me. He would lose everything. That evening, I served dinner in silence. Daniel sat across from me, cutting his chicken, oblivious to the storm building around him. I watched him, the man I had loved for 40 years, and I realized something with startling clarity. The affair had erased our marriage, but now I would erase the illusion that he still controlled the ending. The morning after Elisa's call, I woke with a strange calmness. For weeks, my body had been wired with shock and rage, but now a quiet clarity settled over me. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't trapped. For the first time in 40 years, I realized Daniel had more to lose than I did. I went about my routine deliberately, almost theatrically. I brewed the coffee, set out his mug, and greeted him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He looked relieved, maybe even hopeful, mistaking my composure for forgiveness. Let him think that. His comfort was my weapon now. That afternoon, I pulled out the dusty file boxes from the closet in our study. Bank statements, property deeds, insurance papers, the foundation of a life we'd built together. Except now I saw them differently. Not as shared security, but as leverage. For decades, I had trusted Daniel with the finances. He was always the one balancing the books, investing, making sure we were secure. I had played my part, raising the children, managing the home, ensuring he could build his career without distraction. I hadn't realized until that moment how much power I had willingly handed him. But I wasn't naive anymore. I spent hours going through every folder, every statement, taking notes in my journal. At first, it was overwhelming, but then a pattern emerged. Accounts he hadn't mentioned in years. Withdrawals that didn't match our household needs. A credit card I didn't recognize. It all painted a picture of a man living two lives. That evening, I sat across from him at dinner again, and when he asked about my day, I said, "Productive." That was all. His fork paused midair, just briefly, before he covered it with a laugh. But I saw the flicker of worry. He knew something had shifted. Days passed like this, him pretending normalcy, me quietly gathering ammunition. Each time I discovered another discrepancy, another lie buried in paperwork, the weight on my chest lightened. I was no longer just a betrayed wife. I was preparing for battle. One night, I picked up the phone and called Elise again. She sounded startled to hear from me, but her voice steadied when she realized I wasn't calling to scream. "Elise," I said, "you wanted the truth. Well, I've found it. He's been lying to both of us. About money, about commitment, about everything. You've been his distraction, I've been his cover. And we're both disposable to him." She was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," I said, "if you're going to break free from him, now's the time. And if you won't, then you'll go down with him." "I won't." The line stayed silent, but I knew my words had landed. She wasn't my ally, not exactly, but her disillusionment was another crack in Daniel's armor. Meanwhile, Daniel kept trying to woo me back into complacency. He booked dinner reservations at my favorite restaurant, suggested a weekend getaway, even pulled out the old photo albums one night as if nostalgia could glue broken trust back together. But as he pointed at our children's baby pictures, his voice thick with sentiment, all I felt was detachment. He was playing a role, reciting lines from a script he thought I wanted to hear. And maybe once I would have melted, but not anymore. The turning point came when our eldest son, Mark, called. He was cheerful at first, updating me on the grandkids, but then his tone shifted. "Mom," he said, "Dad called me yesterday. He sounded off. He said you two were working through some things. Is everything okay?" I froze. Daniel had dragged our son into this without my knowledge. The audacity boiled my blood, not because of Mark's concern, but because Daniel was already spinning his version of the story, setting the stage, so that if I exposed him, I'd be painted as irrational, overreacting, maybe even cruel. I chose my words carefully. "Mark, your father and I are handling something private. Don't worry. But remember, not everything he says is the full truth. Just keep that in mind." It was vague, but it planted a seed. I wasn't going to let Daniel control the narrative. Not with my children. That night I confronted him. Calmly, coldly. "You've been talking to Mark," I said as we stood in the kitchen. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his hand tightening around his glass. "I just thought he deserved to know his parents were." "Were what?" I cut in. "Working through your lies? Cleaning up after your affair? Which version did you give him, Daniel? The one where you're a victim of circumstance? Or the one where I'm the cold, unforgiving wife who drove you into someone else's arms?" His face paled. He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg or cry. I simply looked at him and said, "You should be very careful about the stories you tell. Because I know the truth. And soon, everyone else will too." He slammed his glass down on the counter, shattering it, shards flying across the tile. His voice shook with anger. "You don't know what you're doing, Clara." But I only smiled, a cold, quiet smile, because I knew exactly what I was doing. I was rewriting the ending of our story. After that night in the kitchen, something in me hardened. 40 years of softness, of bending, of smoothing over his rough edges gone. I was no longer Daniel's partner in preserving appearances. I was his mirror, reflecting every ugly truth he tried to bury. The days that followed were strangely liberating. For so long, I had lived under the illusion that my worth was tied to him, to our marriage, to the family unit we had built. But now, each secret uncovered, each lie exposed, gave me back a piece of myself. One morning, I sat at the dining table with my journal open and began to write everything down. Not just the finances I had traced, but the emotions, the years of sacrifice, the betrayals I had overlooked. I wrote about how I had given up my own career to raise our children, how I had cooked his meals, mended his shirts, hosted his colleagues, smiled on cue at every event. I wrote about how I had endured his absences, his late nights, his dismissive comments, all because I believed in loyalty. And now that loyalty had been shattered. By the time Daniel walked into the room, briefcase in hand, ready for another day of pretending to be the respectable husband and professional, I had filled 10 pages. He glanced at the journal and frowned. "What's that?" he asked. "My truth," I said simply, closing it and placing my hand on top. "And one day, the world will read it." He scoffed, but his eyes betrayed him. He was rattled. He knew I wasn't bluffing. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer. Not the one we had used for family matters in the past, but a new face, someone who didn't know Daniel, someone who would see me as a client, not as half of a couple. I laid out the documents I had gathered, the bank statements, the discrepancies. The lawyer's eyes widened as he pieced it together. "Mrs. Clark," he said, "what you're showing me suggests your husband has been diverting significant funds. This isn't just an affair. It's financial deception." The word echoed in my mind, deception. I had thought of him as unfaithful, dishonest. But deception was bigger. It meant years of strategy, years of manipulation. It meant I had been living with a man who saw me not as a partner, but as a cover. When I walked out of that office, the weight on my shoulders had shifted again. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't a victim. I was holding evidence that could dismantle him, in court, in business, and reputation. That evening, when Daniel returned home, I didn't greet him. I didn't ask about his day. I simply placed an envelope on the counter. Inside was a copy of the lawyer's card and one of the statements he hadn't expected me to find. He pulled it out, his face draining of color as he realized what it was. "You went snooping," he hissed. "I went looking for the man I thought I married," I replied. "And instead I found a stranger." For the first time, Daniel didn't bluster. He didn't shout or make excuses. He stood there, cornered, his mask slipping. And I saw something I hadn't seen before, fear. It wasn't fear of losing me. I doubt he cared about that anymore. It was fear of losing control. The silence stretched between us, heavy and electric. Then, softly I said, "You built a life on my loyalty, Daniel. But that's gone. And without it, your empire crumbles." He didn't answer. He simply left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. 4 years, I had shared that bed with him, the man I thought was my partner, my love, my future. Now I lay beside a ghost, a man whose choices had erased 4 decades of what I thought was love. The next day, I took another step. I called Mark again, this time with more openness. "Son," I said, "you need to know the truth. Your father has betrayed this family. He's been living a double life. I don't want to pull you into the ugliness, but I refuse to let his lies poison your perspective." Mark was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Mom, I had a feeling. I didn't want to believe it, but thank you for telling me." I could hear the heartbreak in his voice, the disillusionment. But I also heard something else, solidarity. Over the next week, I spoke with each of our children. I didn't unload every sordid detail, but I told them enough. Enough for them to understand that their mother wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting. Enough for them to see Daniel clearly. Each call was painful. Each one reopened the wound. But with every conversation, I felt the net tightening around him. He had lost control of the narrative. His secrets were no longer his alone. Daniel grew quieter, more withdrawn. He spent longer hours at work, but I suspected those hours were filled with frantic phone calls to Elise, desperate attempts to patch together the world crumbling around him. I no longer cared. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't focused on his comfort, his reputation, his needs. I was focused on me. And though the pain was sharp, though the betrayal still cut me to the bone, there was also a strange, exhilarating freedom in it. I wasn't erasing 40 years of love. He had done that. I was reclaiming the years I still had left. The day came when silence was no longer an option. I had been careful, deliberate, collecting everything like a woman preparing for battle, not with fists or guns, but with truth. 40 years of trust, broken in one revelation. 40 years of loyalty, answered with deceit. I woke that morning with clarity. The sun poured through the blinds, illuminating the same kitchen where I had once cooked for him, smiled for him, poured coffee for him. But today, I didn't make his breakfast. I didn't wait for him to shuffle in, pretending everything was fine. Instead, I placed a thick file on the counter, neatly bound, like a final exam he was destined to fail. When Daniel came down, briefcase in hand, he froze. His eyes locked on the file. He didn't touch it at first, as though it might burn him. "What's this?" he asked, voice already trembling. "Proof," I said evenly. "Proof of everything you've hidden from me. The accounts, the transfers, the lies." He swallowed hard, but I didn't stop. I wanted him to feel every word. For 40 years, I gave you my loyalty, my love, my silence. You repaid me with betrayal. And now, Daniel, it's over. You don't control the story anymore. I do. He opened the file, his hands shaking. Line after line of numbers stared back at him. Withdrawals, secret deposits, unexplained expenses. Each page was a blade, cutting into the fantasy he had built. Finally, he looked up, his face pale. "You don't understand," he stammered. "It wasn't like that." "Don't you dare," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I had ever used with him. "Don't you dare try to rewrite this. I know what I've seen. I know what you've done." His mouth opened, then closed. The silence between us was louder than any scream. Later that week, I gathered the children again, this time in person. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a pleasant family dinner or a warm reunion. It was an intervention. We sat in the living room, me, Daniel, and our 3 children. The tension was unbearable, thick enough to choke on. "Dad," Mark began, his voice tight, "is it true? What Mom showed us?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room. "It's complicated." "No, I cut in. It's simple. He's been lying to us all. To me, to you, to this family. And now he thinks we'll swallow it like we always have. Not anymore." Anna crossed her arms, tears brimming in her eyes. "How could you do this, Dad? To Mom? To us?" For once, Daniel had no ready answer. He looked small, diminished, as though 40 years of power had drained out of him in minutes. "I thought," he whispered, but his words faltered. "You thought I would never find out," I finished. "You thought I would keep playing the faithful wife, the blind fool. But those days are gone. I found my voice, Daniel. And I won't be silent again." The children sat stunned. They had never seen me like this, strong, unyielding, unwilling to smooth things over. 4 years, I had been the glue, the peacemaker. Now, I was the one tearing off the mask, exposing the cracks. That night, after everyone left, Daniel tried again. He followed me to the bedroom, his tone softer, almost pleading. "Clara, we can fix this. Don't throw everything away." I turned to face him, my heart pounding, but my resolve unshaken. "You threw it away," I said. "The day you chose lies over truth. The day you chose someone else over me. I'm not the one who destroyed 40 years. You are." For the first time, I saw tears in his eyes. But they didn't move me. Not anymore. They were too late, too shallow, too convenient. I walked past him, closed the bedroom door, and locked it. On the other side, I could hear him breathing heavily, perhaps trying to find the words to reel me back in. But I was no longer listening. The next morning, I filed for separation. Not quietly, not in the shadows. I made it known, to the lawyer, to the children, to the friends who had watched us for decades. The perfect marriage was a lie, and I was done living in lies. There was no celebration in it, no joy in watching him squirm, only a deep, aching sadness, mixed with the faintest glimmer of something new, freedom. That evening, as I sat alone on the porch, I realized something important. I wasn't mourning the loss of my husband. I was mourning the loss of the life I thought I had, the story I had told myself for 40 years. And though it broke me, it also freed me. The woman who once lived in Daniel's shadow was gone. In her place stood someone who understood a brutal but vital truth. Love without respect is not love at all. And that truth, sharp and heavy as it was, became my weapon, my shield, my salvation. The court date was set for spring. By then, the air carried the scent of blossoms, but inside me, a storm brewed. I had lived through winters of silence, summers of false smiles, and autumns of secrets. This spring, I was determined to live in truth, no matter how sharp, no matter how painful. Walking into the courtroom, I felt every year of my age, but I also felt every ounce of my strength. Daniel sat across from me, looking older, smaller, diminished by the weight of exposure. The man who once carried himself like a king now seemed like a child caught with his hand in the jar. My lawyer, a firm but gentle woman named Caroline, laid out the evidence, the hidden accounts, the hotel stays, the transactions that had no explanation. She spoke not just of money, but of betrayal, of a woman who had carried a marriage on her shoulders only to be discarded for someone younger, someone newer, someone unworthy of what I had built. Daniel's lawyer tried to paint me as bitter, as vindictive, but every time they asked me a question, I answered with clarity. I was not confused. I was not hysterical. I was simply telling the truth. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, I almost didn't recognize his voice. It was shaky, filled with excuses and half-truths. He said he was lonely, that I hadn't understood him, that the affair just happened. The judge looked unimpressed. My children sat behind me, silent but solid in their support. Anna squeezed my shoulder as I passed her. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. The ruling came quickly. The assets would be divided, but my dignity remained untouched. The law couldn't heal betrayal, but it could give me something Daniel never did: fairness. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, sniffing at the story of a long marriage undone by secrets. I didn't give them sound bites. I didn't know the world my pain. What I owed was to myself, my silence where I wanted it, my voice where it mattered. That night, alone in my new apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine. The city lights blinked outside, not accusing, not pitying, just existing. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to exist too. I wasn't Daniel's wife anymore. I wasn't defined by his lies. I was Clara, a woman who had survived betrayal, who had walked through fire and found herself on the other side. Did it hurt? Yes. Every day. 40 years of love doesn't just vanish without scars. But scars are proof of survival. Scars mean I lived. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, I began to rebuild. I joined a painting class, something I had always wanted but never dared because Daniel wouldn't approve. I traveled with Anna to Italy, walking cobblestone streets I had only ever dreamed of. I reconnected with old friends who reminded me of the woman I had been before marriage swallowed me whole. Some nights, when the loneliness crept in, I thought of Daniel. Not with longing, not with rage, but with a strange kind of distance. He was a chapter, nothing more. And that chapter had closed. The greatest betrayal of my life had also given me the greatest gift: freedom. The freedom to live not as someone's wife, not as someone's caretaker, not as someone's fool, but as Clara. Just Clara. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever felt invisible, betrayed, discarded by someone you gave your life to, hear me clearly. You are not alone, and you are not powerless. I thought my life ended when I found out about his affair. But what really ended was the illusion. And sometimes, the end of an illusion is the beginning of truth. My name is Clara. I am 70 years old. I survived 40 years of lies. And today, I live in honesty, in dignity and freedom. Broken heart, if my story touched you, I want to know, what would you have done in my place? Please tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Backhanded ex-pointing right. If you believe that love without respect is not love at all, please like this video. Pushpin. And if you want to hear more real stories of betrayal, survival, and starting over, subscribe to my channel. Your support means more than you know. This is not the end of my story. It's the beginning of the life I should have lived all along. And maybe, just maybe, it can be the beginning of yours too.